Good afternoon and welcome to this month's Center Conversation. For those of you who I have not had the opportunity to meet, I am the newly, or relatively newly, appointed Executive Director of the International Motor Racing Research Center, and I am very happy to have you here today. Before turning it over to Glenda, who will introduce our program, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank those of you who have responded to our sponsorship team appeal. Headed this year by famed race driver Butch Leisinger, our sponsorship team appeal provides the revenues to support the center and to enable us to provide these center conversations free of charge. And I bring you good news. If you have not yet had the opportunity to fill out a sponsorship team appeal, it's not too late. On the table, on the Decatur Street side of the lobby there, we have some envelopes, and I would welcome and appreciate your considering a contribution to support the center. The other idea that I'd like to plant in your heads is that for those of you who are collectors or know collectors of racing memorabilia, we would be delighted and honored to absorb your collection into the archives of the Motor Racing Research Center at such time as you're ready to part with them. So help us be ambassadors and spread that word to racers and collectors that you may know so that we can continue to build the collection here at the Research Center. One more note before I turn it over to Glenda. Next month's Center Conversation is going to begin earlier than usual. So next month's program, the Central New York Raceway Park, featuring Glenn Donnelly, Peter Argetsinger, and John Lehman, will begin at 11 a.m. rather than 1 p.m. So mark your calendars and come a little bit earlier next month. Okay. And now, I will give you an introduction to the person who will give you the introduction. Glenda.
I'll just stay down.
You're going to stay down there? Go on.
Yeah.
Howdy. So my first task is just wonderful. That's going to be interesting. We might have to deal with this feedback.
Try the middle.
Okay.
A little bit.
All right. So first thing we're going to do is draw the winning raffle ticket for the 3 tickets to the Indy 500. And to do the drawing is Father Michael Hartney and Susan Hartney, who donated the tickets in memory of Jack Hartney. And Father Michael will talk about that, I'm sure, before he draws. Yeah, sure. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, Dad and I attended the Indianapolis 500 for almost 50 years in a row. His last race was, hard to talk about it, we found his brick, which you noticed the year before, and I have a lovely picture of him getting on his knees to look at it. But at one time we had 15 seats in Grandstand C, which is visible in this photo, by the way. It's the grandstand, well, I can almost see it. It's kind of like right there. Tickets are further up at the top of section 6 in Grandstand C. That's the wooden grandstand, of course, which has been replaced with the same grandstand that's right there. Anyway, that's enough of that.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
3 tickets.
3 great tickets to the Indy 500.
They're only $30
Yeah,
for 3 tickets. That's $10 a ticket.
yeah. 100th anniversary race.
What a deal. How many tickets did you sell?
41.
40 tickets.
Nice little fundraiser for
1
us.
in 40 chances, and the winner is George Alderman of Hawkinson, Delaware.
Cool.
Congratulations, George.
Okay, well, thank you very, very, very much.
And I'll call Mr. Alderman when I go back over. So, now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Andrew Layton. We've known Andy for a few years as he's been working on this book he's going to talk about today, about Ray Crawford. I'm not sure how Andy first got onto us, he'll have to tell you that, but it's been a real pleasure to get to know him and work with him. Andy's full-time job is with the Michigan Air National Guard, which is why we had to switch dates, because they needed him last weekend and we couldn't have him. So again, we apologize for that and the confusion it caused, but we're just so happy he's here today. This is not the first book Andy's written. I'm going to read these titles. One, Wolverines in the Sky, the stories of 56 fighter aces from Michigan. Eagle's Wings, the story of World War II prisoners of war, Jack Curtis and Larry Jenkins. And Downrange, a novel based on his own experiences as an Air Force veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'd really like to read that one, so I'm going to have to check that one out. So, Andy now races in SCCA. I think I read somewhere that working on this book, he got the bug to race, though it started with his grandfather, I think, and maybe he'll talk a little bit about that too. So, one of our birthday boys today, Andrew Layden.
Thanks very much, Glenda, and I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here today. Tom, everybody with the center, it's definitely a pleasure to be here, and I get to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is Ray Crawford, so great way to spend a birthday. Thank you very much. As Glenda mentioned, last year I finished finally the book on Ray Crawford. It was about 29 months in the making, and it was kind of a bittersweet experience actually to complete the book because I had so much fun researching Ray's life and then kind of living some of his experiences vicariously. So I'll talk a little bit more about what exactly that entailed here in a little bit, but I guess the first place that we can start is to talk about actually why I became interested in doing this project. Ray Crawford has been in my consciousness since I was about 15 years old. As Glenda mentioned, I come from a racing family. My grandfather, Jack Layden, restored several 1950s era roadsters. He had the 1958 A.J. Watson built Dick Rathman pole sitter, and he had the 1954 Dean Van Lines Champ car also that Jimmy Bryan drove to a couple of national championships. So I remember these cars very well, you know, from the time that I was a little kid, and I always felt a connection to that era of racing. As Glenda mentioned, I'm also in the Air National Guard. The Air Force is a big part of my life, and I love the stories of World War II veterans. I worked at a VA hospital growing up, and I interviewed many of them about their experiences. I just always felt a connection with that too. So I knew that there was this guy named Ray Crawford that did both of those things, and I thought, wow, you know, what a great story that would be. So I think I kind of was waiting around for someone else to do a book about Ray's life because I thought, gosh, there's probably no better story. But it wasn't really until 2013, my wife Elise and I were at the Indy 500, we're looking around at the gift shop, and you see biographies of all these other drivers, and I thought, gosh, if nobody's going to do this story on Ray, then I guess it's up to me. So not long after that, I reached out to Ray's youngest son, Mitchell. I actually got in touch with him and got the family's permission to go ahead with the book, and the rest is history, I guess. So a brief overview of Crawford's life. I mean, I knew it was going to be a good story going into it, but as I started to dive into his story even more, I found out all these other things. I was like, wow, this guy is probably one of the most influential racers of his generation, even though not many people know the name. He was, obviously a World War II fighter ace, one of the first jet test pilots. He owned a chain of supermarkets on the West Coast. He had 3 Indy 500 starts in an era when it was very difficult just to make the show. He ran in both Monza 500s and ran all 5 Mexican road races, 1950 to 1954. He won the stock car class in that last race. He was one of the original members of Team Corvette, and he had many influential innovations in racing also that we'll see live here in just a couple minutes. So again, people ask, why Ray Crawford? Why did you do this? Again, this is the intersection of 2 passions for me. The World War II aviation, the Air Force, and then also auto racing. So there's some of the evidence there photographically. So like I said, about 29 months in production for the book. It was a lot of fun because it took on a completely different life and of its own, I guess, from what I initially anticipated it to be. Early last year, actually, I had the opportunity to interview Dick Wallen, who's a noted photographer and filmmaker, who I knew had a connection with Crawford. That's why I wanted to interview him. But as we got talking, I realized that the connection there was much more influential in Wallen's life than I realized. It was actually Ray Crawford who said to Dick, gosh, you need to be doing this as a profession. Your work is that much better than the rest of those so-called professionals. So Dick said, gosh, I want to be involved in this project because Ray did so much for me. So that was really a neat opportunity because I got to work with Dick. He was instrumental in the layout for the book, and we got to do a nice promotional event in Burbank last year when the book came out. So that was really a cool connection there between Ray, someone that he influenced, and it all came back full circle because Dick was able to help me out with the book. You can also see Alice Hanks in that picture, wife of Sam Hanks, the 1957 Indy 500 winner. She did the foreword for the book, and as you'll see, Sam Hanks was obviously very instrumental in Ray's story as well. So went to California about 5 times to do interviews, 30 plus individuals that knew Ray, 10 trips to the Indy 500, or to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Donald Davidson was a big influence there, and 4 trips right here to the International Motor Racing Research Center. A lot of miles. So I guess to start from the beginning, if we're going to talk about Ray Crawford's life, we have to talk about his early life, which had a lot to do with why he became a race car driver. Ray was born in 1915. His parents, W.H. Crawford and Lemuria Crawford, were actually very poor. Ray's father worked as a beekeeper, as well as a number of other odd jobs. They traveled around. Ray was born in New Mexico, and then by the early 20s, they had relocated to Southern California. Ray's father worked for a time in a supermarket, and he said to himself, gosh, this is pretty easy work. Maybe I need to open up my own market. So in 1924, he started his own business basically out of the back of a truck. And they went from selling fruit and watermelon to owning a full-size market over the course of about 5 years. So the original market was called Parkett Market, and that went bankrupt during the Great Depression. Ray's father started over and eventually built the Crawford supermarket brand. And by the 1930s, about 1935 or so, they were bringing in several million a year. So there's one of the original locations in Alhambra, California. There's a family photo about 1919. Ray, as a child, growing up in this very poor environment initially, used sports as a way to kind of find an outlet. He really enjoyed competition, and I think that was a way that he dealt with the psychology of growing up in this environment of poverty. So he was very competitive, loved sports, but playing baseball, his family didn't have enough money to even get him a proper glove. So it turns out that the rest of his teammates actually pooled resources to get him the glove that he needed. So that was pretty interesting. Ray also took a mechanical engineering class as a junior in high school that would be very influential in his life. One of his classmates there was a guy named Sam Hanks, who was a senior at that time. And they both connected over this class. Sam was especially interested in the mechanical aspects of it, but Ray, who was not mechanical, simply was intrigued by the idea of going fast. Again, he saw something freeing and a way that he could kind of, again, overcome the limitations of his upbringing that way. So that was as a senior in high school. He worked for his family's supermarkets for much of his early life. And that changed a lot in 1941 when his mother actually shot his father in a dispute over finances. And it was an accidental shooting. His mother was never criminally punished or anything, but it certainly had some repercussions within the family. So Ray's mother and father separated, and at the time they had 9 supermarkets. His mother maintained control of 5 of those markets. His father took 4. But Ray was vice president eventually of both sides of the Crawford family brand. So kind of an interesting story there. We'll also see later that Ray's mother was not a lady that you'd want to cross. When World War II broke out, Ray was drafted into the regular Army. He anticipated being assigned to a coastal artillery unit, but he had a little bit of experience in aviation. He wasn't a solo pilot officially, but he said that he was probably the youngest person ever to fly a plane by himself, because he had taken a couple lessons when he was in high school, and then one day he went back to the airport to try to take another lesson, and his regular flight instructor wasn't there. So the guy that was taking care of the records made a mistake and just kind of said, "Go ahead, take a plane." So Ray's thinking, that's pretty cool. He took off with no problem, and then he couldn't figure out how to land it, and they had to talk him down. But he, long story short, he says, "Yeah, I should be in a record book someplace, because I soloed with about 3 hours." But I guess that experience made a pretty big impact on him, because when he had the opportunity to apply for aviation flight school, he jumped at it. Ray really wanted to fly fighters. He thought, the fast, sleek aircraft is where he wanted to be. But because he was relatively old for an aviator at that time, 26, the Air Force wanted to actually put him in bombers or cargo planes, which would be easier on his decrepit frame. So he just barely missed that cutoff, and did actually get to go to the fighter school that he wanted to attend. But for his friend Sam Hanks, this age cutoff was a frustration, because I think Hanks was only about 8 months older than Crawford, and he was denied flight training. So Sam would go on to fly, or he would fly as a private pilot, but during the war, he worked as a contract approver and engine development officer in Ohio. So Ray went to flight training at Luke Field, Arizona. One of his flight instructors was actually Barry Goldwater, who would go on to run for president in 1964 against Lyndon Johnson. And he graduated September 20th, 1942. Now, he married Marion Tronson the same day that he graduated from flight school, actually. And they had known each other since college. They both went to USC together. So after graduating from flight school, Ray was assigned to the 82nd Fighter Group. He was credited or certified as a P-38 pilot, and they sent him to North Africa, where he would engage the Luftwaffe in some of the original and earliest battles in the European and North African theater. A lot of the missions that he was flying were bomber escorts over Sicily, southern Italy.
Would you move just a little to the middle?
Sure.
That's going to be a little bit better.
Okay. So he flew a lot of bomber escort missions, and that was at a time where they had very little resources. The conditions that they were in were very rough. I know even as aviators, they would usually, being back from the front lines, they would usually get pretty good facilities and such, but that was not the case with Ray. Even bathing, was a challenge for them. So one of the interesting things about doing the project with Ray's story was that early on, Mitchell Crawford, Ray's son, pulled out a stack of letters and actually allowed me to use them in the book. And it turns out that these were about 150 letters that Ray had written back to their mother, Marion, during his time overseas. So it was very interesting to read these things that Ray was sending back home at a very pivotal time in his life. I thought I had a pretty good familiarity with World War II aviation up until that point, but reading these letters changed my whole conception of what it was like. Some of the letters would even start out before a mission, and he would write, and then he'd say, I'm about to take off, and then there'd be ... and he would come back and finish the letter, and would even talk about shooting down planes and some of the actual work they were doing. It had a very it was really a challenge for Ray, I think, to deal with these combat experiences. He said he didn't like the mechanized nature of it. He didn't like the impersonality of it. And again, all these things came out through the letters. So in the book, we were able to use Ray's voice a lot, and I think that was pretty powerful. So Ray shot down his first enemy aircraft on March 1st, 1943. It was two Me-109 fighters. It was a German Messerschmitt plane. And that was his 8th combat mission. That mission also earned him a Distinguished Flying Cross, which is the 3rd highest award for valor that a military aviator can earn. Here's one of the V-mail letters that Ray sent back. It's just kind of an example of the material that we had access to for the book. And then there's Ray, second from left, with some of the other aces from his fighter group. April 11th, 1943, he shot down 2 more German transport planes, bringing his total aerial victories to 5, and that made him a bona fide fighter ace. Now, an ace is any aviator that shoots down 5 or more enemy aircraft in flight. There's been about 1,400 of them in American history. So it was elite, definitely elite company for Ray to be a part of. And you know, he made headlines at home. He was featured in the Los Angeles Times. But Ray was very uncomfortable with all the attention because it was exaggerated. And he said, "Gosh, when I get home, I'm going to be a disappointment because I haven't done half the things they say that I've done." And some of the newspaper articles were pretty amazing. You know, they said Crawford shoots down 6 planes in one day and all this stuff. So again, he didn't feel comfortable with the notoriety that he gained based on killing. Kind of an interesting and unusual attitude for an ace at that time. So Ray returned back to the United States in April 1943 after flying 50 combat missions. He was highly decorated, again with a Distinguished Flying Cross and 15 air medals. When he came back to the United States, he took it upon himself to campaign for a change in fighter tactics, actually. Until that point, the new pilots that they'd get, the replacement pilots and such, would fly at the tail end of formations. And Ray thought that this didn't make any sense at all because the tail end of the formation was the most dangerous place for a pilot to fly. So he said it should be the other way around. We should have the inexperienced pilots up front, and then we with more experience should be protecting them. So he lobbied for this change on his own time, using his own resources. And he did a number of studies and actually was able to take this to the Pentagon in 1945. I don't know if he ever made it into a personal conference with General Hap Arnold, who was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force at that time, but he definitely sent some memorandums to General Arnold that outlined this theory. But because of the connections that he gained at the Pentagon, Ray was able to wrangle an assignment with Lockheed, actually. So in the summer of 1945, he went back to California and became a test pilot there. Originally, he was flying P-80s, and then when originally he was flying P-38s. When the P-80 Shooting Star came out that summer, he was actually the 3rd American military pilot to certify in that aircraft. And the P-80 would become known as America's first operational jet fighter. So Ray Crawford was one of the very first jet test pilots. Kind of a forerunner, kind of a contemporary of the same culture that produced names like Chuck Yeager and those kind of guys. So there's a picture of the P-80, and then there's Crawford in 1945 at Lockheed. One of Crawford's fellow test pilots at Lockheed was Richard Bong, who was a national celebrity at that time. Bong was the highest scoring fighter ace of the war, with 40 Japanese planes shot down. He was also a Medal of Honor recipient, and again, was kind of a darling of the media at that time. Bong had been offered any assignment that he wanted, and he said, "I want to go fly the jets at Lockheed." So it tells you a little bit about the prestige that Ray Crawford was a part of. On August 6, 1945, which was ironically the same day that the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Bong and Crawford were both scheduled to fly. Bong was supposed to have a mission in the morning. Crawford was supposed to have a mission in the afternoon. And, it was vice versa. Crawford was supposed to fly in the morning. Bong was supposed to fly in the afternoon. But it turns out that Bong had a golf outing scheduled with Bing Crosby, the singer. So he said to Ray, "Gosh, I'd really like to do this golf outing. Can you take my flight in the morning and I'll take yours in the afternoon?" So Ray, being a very accommodating and friendly guy, said, "Sure, no problem." So Ray took off in the plane that was assigned to Bong, was out doing his checks, and then afterward, Bong took off in the plane that was originally assigned to Crawford. And when Bong took off, he forgot to switch on the external fuel tanks that they were working with at that time. And as a result, he crashed just a couple of seconds after takeoff. He was killed. The plane, exploded in suburban Burbank, and it was kind of a scandal. This was the top ace of the war. This was a celebrity, and here he is, killed in a senseless crash. Now, to add to this whole dynamic, they didn't know that it was Bong at the time because, again, they had switched planes, so on the flight schedule, it still said that Crawford was the one that went down in this aircraft. So Ray said that when he came back from this test, he landed, and everybody kind of crowded up to the plane to see who it actually was, and he rolled back the canopy, and you can see the looks of disappointment on everybody's faces, because he said, they expected Bong to be the one that climbed out. He said, I've never seen so many people disappointed to see somebody alive in my life. Which again, not exactly the way you want to be remembered. But unfortunately for Ray, in this very superstitious culture of test pilots, he was kind of viewed as the scapegoat for this whole incident. Bong was dead, there was no bringing him back, but a lot of the people that Crawford had flown with pointed fingers at him and said, you shouldn't have switched planes, it's your fault, and he was a bit of an outcast after that. In fact, the Air Force removed Crawford from the flight test program, and his records then indicate that he was flying C-47 cargo planes in Alabama, which was a far cry from these, svelte, state-of-the-art jets. So it didn't take long for Crawford to say, I'm done with this. There was no official punishment, there was no official cause ever determined for Bong's crash, but Ray saw the writing on the wall and he separated from the active duty Air Force in December of 1945. He would stay on in the reserves, but for all intents and purposes, his military career was done. So after that, what do? You're a fighter ace, you're a test pilot, you go back to California and your family's running these supermarkets. He's got a comfortable job, the vice president of this multi-million dollar corporation, but it's just not doing it for him. There was an element of risk and an element of adrenaline that he lost. There was part of his identity that was gone. He thought he'd be flying planes for the rest of his life. So he tried to do his best at the supermarket thing, and I think Ray's actual words were, business was good and life was dull. So for about a year and a half, that was his existence. And then in the winter of 1946, 1947, he ran into Sam Hanks again. And, they meet each other on a street corner, and as Alice Hanks tells the story, Ray said to Sam, hey, what have you been up to? And Sam tells Ray all about his midget racing exploits. He says, I've been running here, I've been running there. There's this place called Gilmore Stadium that's just coming up, and he says, it's a lot of fun. So Ray said, he says, why don't you build me a midget too? It was more or less a joke, but Sam didn't realize that, and he went to Curtis Craft and had a midget ordered and built for Ray Crawford, and it was, the best thing that money could buy at that time with a 110 Offie engine. So over the course of the winter, Sam goes back every day to Curtis Craft and he's checking on the construction of the midget and making sure everything is done right. And then that spring he calls Ray up and he said, Ray, your midget's done. And Ray says, what are you talking about? And Sam says, well, don't you remember, you ordered one. And Ray says, well, I guess I owe you some money. So that was the beginning of Ray Crawford's racing career. He debuted in the midget on the banks of Culver City Speedway in June of 1947, and it was not a pretty sight. He had no illusions about the fact that he had some work to do to compete at the level of a Sam Hanks. He said, this is Ray's words, I put my helmet on, I put my goggles on, at least I look like a race driver. So in fact, he actually spun out, hit the wall, and he was pretty lucky he didn't get hurt. Alice Hanks said that it was about like putting somebody that had never driven a manual transmission into a Ferrari. So Ray, had a sharp learning curve, but he had good support. He had guys like Sam Hanks in his corner, so some good mentors. He also had the assistance of a guy named Art Boyce, who was a master mechanic and actually maintained the ambulance fleet at Torrance General Hospital during the day. So he was kind of Ray's mechanic that maintained the cars. Again, Ray was not mechanical at all, so he needed help in that area also. But he found a passion with this. He said, hey, this replaces some of that thrill that I experienced with the aircraft, with the jets and the fighters. So The thing though that he had to deal with also, in addition to his learning curve, was the fact that a lot of guys just didn't like a supermarket manager being on the racetrack with him. Guys like Bill Vukovich looked at this guy and he said, what the heck is he doing out here? You know, he's trying to win my money. He doesn't need the prize money that I use to feed my family. So I think, in fact, Vukovich leaned over to Crawford one day and said, you know, if I had your money, I wouldn't go anywhere near a race car. So there was a bit of an outsider element that Ray had to contend with also. Now, he dealt with this in a very interesting way because he definitely had resources, but he came to the track and he was so generous. He played card games with all the officials, the race officials and everything, and he'd intentionally lose. He'd do all this stuff to really try to gain some leverage and to score some points with everybody. So pretty soon, you know, okay, he was tolerated. Maybe not appreciated and welcomed with open arms, but they would tolerate him. And, you know, he was allowed to compete. These are a couple of great pictures. I had to share this one on the left. Whoop. This is a picture from Alex Hanks, and that's actually in front of one of the Crawford supermarkets in Albany. You can see Ray there. That's Sam Hanks. This is Ray's wife, Marion, and Alice. And you've got a very young Troy Ruttman up there. And some other names that are in here are Bill Taylor, Danny Oakes. Just a cool picture from that era. And then there's Ray, you know, maybe around the time of his first race. So these are some highlights of that early midget racing period. Ray commonly raced at Gilmore Speedway, Culver City, Carroll Speedway, and all those great names from Southern California. He crashed a lot, I mean, there's no question about that. But luckily he had Art Boyce and Art's apprentice, Don Weaver, to keep his car in good shape. You'll also notice that Ray's wearing a flight suit. It's one of his old military flight suits. And he would sometimes show up to the track in his business attire, you know, a suit and everything, and he'd throw the flight suit on over top of that to keep his suit from getting all dirty. So in 1950, Gilmore Speedway closed and made way for the CBS television studios. That kind of signaled the end of an era in the Southern California midget scene. And it was just at a time when Ray was starting to improve. He had struggled throughout 1947 and 1948, but by 1949, he was actually finishing in the top 10, top 5. He had a couple of really strong second place finishes and was favored to win that year's Turkey Night Grand Prix at Gilmore. He finished 6th in West Coast midget points with AAA that year, and he was right on the verge of a breakthrough when Gilmore closed and this era kind of came to an end. So he definitely wanted to continue in racing, but what was there to do? Well, in 1950, a new race was coming onto the scene in Mexico, and that was the Carrera Panamericana. Now, the Carrera Panamericana was unique in that the Mexican government actually originally sanctioned this race as a public relations stunt. They had just finished construction of the Pan American Highway, and they thought, what better way to promote this roadway than an auto race? So they kind of lobbied for support from AAA. Guys like Wilbur Shaw and Eddie Rickenbacker promoted it, and it was going to be a great event. You know, the media was all behind it, and it was going to be a grand road race, border to border through Mexico, about 2,000 miles total. So it was a tough race, covering all types of conditions, mountains, open plains, and everything. So Ray Crawford heard about this, and he said, hey, that sounds like my kind of race. This is about as adventurous as you can get. So he puts together an entry. He gets a Lincoln Capri, and he actually approached his buddy Frank Valdez, who's up there in the corner. That's Ray in his World War II uniform and Frank in his Navy uniform. Frank was working at the time as the general manager of Crawford stores. So he said, Frank, this sounds like fun. We should go do this. So they go down, and it's kind of a haphazard affair. You know, there's not a lot of coordination. There's not a lot of structure to this race. And they get down there, and it's a good time, but they didn't do so well. There was very little preparation, and Frank Valdez, I think, realized right off the bat that he was in over his head. There's a story where they were up in the mountains in Mexico, and Ray's bringing the car real close to the edge, so close that Frank is kind of looking over, and he's not too happy with what he sees. So Ray leans over to him and says, Frank, what do you see? Frank says, all I can see from here on out is running a supermarket. So that was the 1950 incarnation of the Mexican road race. 1951, Ray and Frank went back and actually pre-ran the course beforehand. And that gave them a huge edge over some of the competitors who, by the second year had started to include some of the international drivers, names like Piero Taruffi, Alberto Ascari were all down there. And they were very competitive. They finished 8th overall. So against some of the world's best, that's a fair showing. Again, it was in Ray's own self-funded Lincoln. Pretty impressive. 1952, he went back and, again, pre-ran the course, which gave him a great deal of familiarity, but he kind of wore the car out, a little too early, and they had mechanical issues, I think, on the 3rd stage. In 1952, however, he met and became good friends with a guy named Ricky Iglesias, who was a Mexican national, who owned a service station, actually, in Durango, and had helped Ray and Frank Valdez out while they were down there. So Ricky Iglesias would return as a mechanic, and then in 1953, when Frank Valdez's wife had twins and he couldn't go to the Mexican road race, Iglesias stepped in and ran as co-driver for Ray. So again, Ray was pretty good in Mexico. He loved it. He thought it was the most exciting thing you could do. It was pure competition on open roads. It was a challenge, geographically, mechanically, mentally. He was a big fan of the race. He said, "I'm going to do this thing till I'm 100 years old." And really, he was one of 5 drivers, I think, that competed in all 5 Mexican road races. So it was kind of a signature event. But the whole time he was dealing with the same dynamics that he dealt with in the midget racing. Once the big names and the big high-dollar producers got involved in the Mexican road race, pretty soon he was seen as the outsider, the privateer. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. This is pretty cool. This is some of Ray's actual in-car camera footage from the Mexican road race. He early on realized that footage was a great thing to take back to Elks clubs and organizations like that in Southern California, where he would show these films to go around and promote the race. So, really, it started out with his 16 millimeter gun camera footage from World War II, and that's been said to be the first professional in-car camera footage ever taken, in motorsports. So I think this will be pretty interesting. Yeah. So when Ray would take these films around, he would always be asked, "What were you thinking? If you're charging through this roadway at 115 miles an hour, and you've got people standing on both sides of you." And he got the question all the time, but he had rehearsed the answer so well. He would usually say something to the effect of, "Well, I just hope my windshield wipers worked." So in 1953, Ray got the idea to go to Indianapolis. He had been on Sam Hanks's pit crew in 1952. He had seen the speedway, and he knew that was the greatest challenge, the greatest prize in motorsports. So he went full bore. He went to Curtis Craft, and he commissioned a brand new Curtis 500B Roadster, which was the hottest thing off the line at that time. So he shows up to Indianapolis in May of 1953. He's got this brand new car, zero experience in a champ car, or anything more powerful than a midget, basically. He had just done the midget and the stock car racing in Mexico. So he shows up, and the race stewards were very interested in this. And it wasn't every day that a rookie shows up with his own car. And again, people like Vukovic looked at this with a lot of concern. They said, "Gosh, that's what I'm driving, and some of us are dying for that kind of opportunity." So the race stewards go over and they approach Ray and they say, "Well, we need to talk to you, Mr. Crawford." And they say, "What's the fastest you've ever gone before?" And Ray looks at him and he says, 650. He was talking about his jet flying, And they said, "I don't think so." So there was a little bit of animosity there right off the bat with Crawford. He does his rookie test, and the race stewards, Paul Johnson was the chief steward at that time, and they were getting on his case about not looking backward as he came off of the main straightaway into turn 1. That's where the cars were merging back onto the track from the pits. And they said, "You've got to look behind you, when you exit the first straightaway, because you don't want to run into somebody." So Ray goes out there and he's getting annoyed with him. Well, he spins the car going into turn 1. So they come back to him and they say, Ray, what happened? He says, I don't know, I was looking behind me. That's what you told me to do. So they said, okay, Mr. Crawford, you need to come back next year. You need to get some more experience, and you are banned from the Speedway. So that presented a problem because there's this beautiful roadster with Crawford's name sitting on it, and there's no driver. So Ray went through a long list of potential candidates to take his place. Sam Hanks gave him a little bit of help, and I mean, it's pretty interesting to see the names of people that took a shot in Crawford's car that year. One of them was John Fitch, the road racing guy, no previous Indianapolis experience, but he had a shot with Crawford's car, and I think the fastest he got it up to was about 128 miles an hour. Now, Fitch and Crawford had an interesting affinity, I guess, both as fighter pilots in World War II. Fitch shot down a German Me-262 fighter, and I think Crawford and Fitch were probably the only 2 Americans at that time that actually shot planes down during the war that were involved in professional motorsports. So there's definitely a bond there, and we'll see that come back into the story in a little while. Finally, though, they got to Bill Holland. Bill Holland, of course, was the 1949 winner of the Indy 500, and he'd been on a dry spell. He'd been through an embarrassing ban from AAA competition, and he'd been doing everything from racing NASCAR events to operating a thrill show during his time off away from the Speedway. So he came back and he was hungry. He took Crawford's car out, and with 0 prep time, 0 experience, he ran a lap of 138 miles an hour, which was the second fastest time that anybody had seen that month. And we've got some actual footage of that from one of the mobile film presentations of that year. Show that. There we go.
Bill Holland in number 49 gets a second chance to qualify a car after his first car was bumped. This number 49 has shown no speed over 130, but Holland, Indy winner in 19 and 49, is on the comeback trail. After a fast practice run, he takes the flag, diving into the groove in the soft turn. He's really covering ground. His first lap was scorching 138.2. The crowd holds its breath. Can he keep this pace up? And he averages almost 138 for 4 laps. And is his wife happy? Yes, we eat. Bill gets his crew together and gives them a full report as qualifying ends.
So Bill Holland did not finish the race that year. He finished in 15th, actually using Jim Rathman as a relief driver. But he was running as high as 4th during the race, and it was kind of intoxicating for Ray Crawford to see his car up at the front of the pack at the Indy 500, and it just motivated him to want to come back and conquer the Indianapolis 500 years later. He didn't have much success, though, the following year, 1954. He had neglected to get the additional experience that the AAA observers had asked him to obtain. So when he showed back up at the Speedway, he immediately found himself unwelcome. He didn't even get a chance to do his rookie test. But it was interesting because they hired a driver named Ernie McCoy to drive the car. He finished 16th in the race, but the real impressive thing was that there was this young guy on Ray's pit crew named Mickey Thompson. And Mickey Thompson was 23 years old at that time. He was a local mechanic from El Monte that had just begged and begged for Ray Crawford to take him to the Speedway that year. So that was Mickey Thompson's first experience with the track, and of course that would ignite Thompson's desire to come back and own his own team years later. Also in this picture is Mickey's buddy Roger Flores, who would be Mickey's co-driver in the Mexican road race later that year. So very influential connection there with Mickey Thompson and Ray Crawford. Kind of an interesting thing in this picture captures that. So that's the 1954 Indy 500. Prior to that, Ray took another crack at the Mexican road race in 1953. Ricky Iglesias was his co-driver that year, and they didn't even make a splash. They went out of the race early as well. So frustrating time for Crawford, but also significant in that he had purchased the services of Bill Stropp, one of the best mechanics, engine tuners of that era, Southern California, and he was paying Bill Stropp to basically replicate what he was doing with the Lincoln factory cars at that time. Ray said, I want to have the best equipment. I want my cars to be exactly like the factory-funded entries that were being driven by Bill Vukovich, Chuck Stevenson, Johnny Mance, a lot of the top Indy names at that time. So there was a relationship there that would really come into play the following year for Crawford in Mexico. In 1954, Ray also purchased a Curtis Craft Dirt Championship car. He finally decided that it was time to get the experience that they wanted him to get if he was going to go back to Indianapolis and actually compete as a driver. So he campaigned the car through the second half of the 1954 Dirt Championship season. He qualified for 4 races at Indianapolis Fairgrounds, Springfield, Illinois, DuQuoin, and Phoenix that year. He was in the race at DuQuoin that claimed the life of Clay Smith, the mechanic who had also been working on the Lincoln team in Mexico. He, again, learning curve. He was not successful off the bat. His best finish was 14th, although he did manage a strong 4th place qualifying run. But it was enough to get him the experience and kind of win his way into the good graces of AAA. So in 1954, Ray went back to Mexico, and again with assistance from Bill Strop, he said, this is going to be my best shot yet to win. He still wasn't really accepted. He was an outsider. He was paying about $15,000 to basically be a part of the Lincoln team, even though Lincoln, they basically didn't give him the time of day. This picture says a lot about the dynamics on the team, because you see Bob Estes, the promoter, Johnny Mance, AAA and stock car driver, Walt Faulkner, one of the top champ car drivers, Chuck Stevenson, Bill Vukovich, and then there's Ray Crawford in his 3-piece suit, looking very much out of place. And Vukovich looks like he's saying, get this guy away from me. So, there was another story about how all of Strop's cars had a cartoon character painted on the hood. And the cook for the team, actually, a guy named Gordon Smith, went around and did all these cartoons. And they were supposed to characterize the driver. So, there was Stevenson had like Jack the Bear. I think Johnny Mance had Woody Woodpecker. And then there's Crawford's car with Dennis the Menace on the hood. He had a reputation for tearing up equipment. So, kind of an interesting dynamic going into the 1954 road race. Also, you can keep in mind that Clay Smith, who had been basically Strop's second-hand man, was killed just 2 months prior to the Mexican road race. So they had a lot of emotional baggage going into the race. Chuck Day had risen to replace Clay Smith. So there was a lot going on with these guys at that time when they went to Mexico. When they got there, they immediately ran into problems. The whole Lincoln team, basically, all these big name champ car guys ran into problems. A couple of them went out with fuel issues. Bill Vukovich drove his car off a cliff and broke his neck. And there's a story about that too, because Ray was leading actually, and Vukovich says, I'm not going to let the grocery man beat me. So he sees Crawford's car going around a bend. He says, there's the grocery man. And he just guns it, and pretty soon he realizes he's in over his head and they're going over the cliff. So he turns to his co-driver, Vern Hool, who had been begging Vuki to drive the whole time they'd been down in Mexico. And Vukovich turns to him and says, as they're going over the cliff, all right, Vern, here's your shot. You take the wheel. So anyway, Vukovich would spend about 6 weeks in a neck brace after that accident, and he just stewed on the fact that it was Crawford, that drove him to do this. But anyway, as all these top contenders were falling out of the race, Ray Crawford was just having the time of his life. He was out in front, he was leading, and it was kind of a sensation for this independent guy, someone that was not expected to be a threat, to absolutely dominate the race. Pretty soon, the folks from Lincoln took notice, and they said, well, how's this going to look for our PR campaign? So Benson Ford, obviously grandson of Henry Ford, approached Ray at one of the overnight stops for the race and wanted to buy the car from him. And Ray said, where were you 3 years ago? So no go there. Ray continued to do very, very well, and there's some great footage here that we'll show from probably the highlight of Ray's professional racing career. Yeah, I don't know why that's not going. Well, anyway, Ray won the race. Long story short, he won the race, and it was an upset victory. Lincoln did end up purchasing the car back from him for like $26,000, and there was definitely some satisfaction for Ray, who had done this as an independent on his own, and it gained him a lot of respect actually from the national motorsports community. Finally, he was one of the in crowd. So with the purchasing of his car from the Lincoln Company, they sent him around the country for a PR campaign. Ray was on the Ed Sullivan Show, December 6, 1954, and he, of course, trumpeted the Lincoln's virtues and all this stuff. Lincoln actually was a sponsor of the Ed Sullivan Show at that time, so it explains the connection. But he went all over from Detroit to New York, promoting the Lincoln. He talked about ways that the Lincoln could be improved. He had input with the engineers, and they all took his feedback very respectfully. So again, Ray was really for a short time kind of on the forefront of the motorsports scene. This was a big race. At that time, the Mexican road race was probably second only to the Indy 500 as far as following and prestige. And Ray also parlayed that success into other opportunities to compete in other venues. In 1955, he took this Curtis Craft sports car that he got from Bill Stropp down to Sebring. Chuck Day was originally scheduled to be the co-driver, but Chuck Day never showed up. So Ray actually asked for permission to run the whole 12 hours by himself, and he did so. And to this day, he's the only one that's ever done all 12 hours at Sebring alone. I can't imagine going over that track. If you're familiar with Sebring at all, it's bumpy, it's battering, and for a car with such a rudimentary suspension, that must have been a tough 12 hours. Ray did win his class actually that year, and he finished very respectfully in the overall rankings. So he still holds that record. Pretty interesting. 1955, when he went back to Indianapolis, he had the respect that he needed from AAA. He competed in the Champ Car events. He'd won the Mexican road race. So all of a sudden, where he had been not welcome before, he's actually a favorite to win Rookie of the Year honors. He did a great job in his rookie test. They welcomed him to the Speedway, and he was all set to go. He qualified 23rd and was running fairly well until I think on the second pit stop, one of his crew members put the wheel on backwards. So he had to go back in, take another pit stop. But that was actually quite fortuitous because he had been running right around the cars Johnny Boyd, Roger Ward, and Al Keller, who would be involved in the Vukovic accident just a few laps later. So that took him out of the contention basically in that accident, took him out of play. And of course we all know how that worked out with Bill Vukovic. So Ray went out on lap 115 with engine problems, and that was when they told him basically that Vukovic had been killed. So that's a picture just after finding out, that Vukovic was dead. Even though the two had kind of had a rivalry going back to their midget days, Ray had a lot of respect for Vukovic as a race driver, and that really impacted him. Even into his later years, into his 60s and 70s, he would look at pictures of Vukovic and tear up. So I like this photo also, taken just before the start of the race, because we often see pictures at Indianapolis where it's ceremonious and everybody's excited and happy. This shows the tension and the anxiety that these guys were facing, just moments before the race was about to start. Ray's son, Mike, often talks about how he would go and hand his dad his helmet, right before the start of the 500. And he'd give him the helmet, and Ray would always say to him, you be careful now, and Mike's like, yeah, right, you need to be the one who's watching things. So also in 1955, which is probably Ray's busiest year of competition, he thought it'd be a great idea to get into hydroplane racing. So he got together with some engineers from the aircraft community, actually, And they decided to develop a hydroplane that was going to be based off of an aircraft wing. So the idea was that the wing would elevate onto the surface of the water and kind of lift up. And they were thinking that they could probably break the world speed record on water with an Allison engine straight out of a P-38, which is about 4,000 horsepower. So they took the hydroplane, once it was developed, to Lake Mead. They called it the Zephyr Fury, which was interesting because Ray's father had designed a check stand for the supermarkets that he called the Zephyr, so there was a connection there. They took the boat to Lake Mead, and they said, we're going to set the world speed record on water. And the boat was designed backwards, so that when they actually got in the throttle, it would go into the water. The wing was designed backwards, so not so successful. Ray said afterwards, he's like, well, it was a hell of an idea at the time. He took it to the Gold Cup competition in Seattle, also that year. Didn't qualify. Again, basically there was no speed at all to the thing. It was just a design flaw. And Ray's solution to that was to add more horsepower to the 4,000 horsepower Allison engine, but that didn't work out very well either. So he made the boat into a planter, and he had flowers in it in front of the supermarket. That's the fate of the Zephyr Fury. It just shows you, though, the enthusiasm that Crawford had for anything related to speed or anything related to competition. He was game for everything. 1956 was an interesting year for Crawford, though, because he began to focus more on sports car racing. He had the great showing at Sebring in 1955, and John Fitch actually approached him after that. And remember, Fitch had driven Crawford's car in Indianapolis in 1953. Fitch says, Ray, I'm starting this new operation with GM, and we've got these Corvette sports cars that are going to be great. We're assembling a team of drivers, and I want you to be on the team. So Crawford said, hey, this is fantastic. This is the first time I've been asked to drive somebody else's car without putting the funding up myself. So Ray went down to Sebring and actually did very, very well in the first official outing for Team Corvette. He finished 13th overall, second in his class, and of course was teamed with greats like John Fitch, Walt Hansgen. Crawford's own co-driver was Max Goldman, who was another merchant from Michigan, the clothing store. But it was just a really great time in Crawford's career because, again, he was finally getting offers to drive for other cars, other owners. It never happened before. And of course, we all know the significance of the first Corvette team. So I went back to Indianapolis that year, and Crawford had a couple ideas about safety after the Bill Vukovich accident that he really thought were crucial. He had done some tests, and he found out that the seatbelt that Vukovich was wearing was kind of haphazardly created. And of course, being a test pilot with the Air Force, he had these great aviation harnesses that he wanted all the drivers to wear. He did a breakdown actually where the stitching on it was like 23 times more durable than the seatbelt that Vukovich had been wearing. So, 1956, he jokingly puts this crash test sign on the front of his car because he's talking about safety and seatbelts, and then it's also to distinguish the car from Sam Hanks's Roadster, which had a similar paint job. So Crawford started 17th that year, and then on lap 49, he tested the seatbelt theory by crashing the car into the wall and walked away. So again, this generated some interest, and people started wearing these aviation-style seatbelts, and it was pretty influential. Ray, by that time, had also become something of a spokesman within the driver body with USAC now, and again, he was well educated. He spoke well. He was personable. And that's something that a lot of the drivers had actually come to respect. In December 1956, he went back for Corvette and raced the SR2 at the Nassau Speed Weeks. There were only 2 SR2s built, and this was one of them. He won one of the preliminary races in his class and went out of the Governor's Cup event with engine problems, but again significant because it was an early Corvette effort and another chance for Ray to tear up someone else's equipment. We haven't talked much about Ray's family life. Through this whole time, he was still working full time, as the vice president of Crawford Supermarkets. The store had just expanded exponentially. And in 1957, they were actually grossing about $25 million a year. So it was a remarkably successful company. And Ray had a lot to do with the PR and marketing side of their business. His family was still engaged. You know, his mother and father were still the president, but he was actually quite involved in operations. His two sons, Mike and Mitchell. Mike was the oldest, born in 1948. The youngest is Mitchell, born in 1953. For a while, they raced quarter midgets also, and were strongly influenced by their father in that area. And there's Mike and there's Mitchell there. This is Ray's wife, his brother Bill, his mother, and his sister-in-law. So that's in front of the store opening in Montebello, California. In 1957, Ray went back to Indianapolis with sponsorship from McGuire's. We had talked about how Ray's mother had had the shooting incident with his father. She was, again, not a woman you want to irritate. She did not like racing at all. And Ray had finally talked her into coming to one of the races with him in 1955, Indianapolis. She'd never seen him compete before. So, of course, she goes down there. 1955 Indianapolis, she sees Bill Vukovich get killed, and she's got a very negative outlook on the whole thing that Ray was pursuing. So it had actually gotten to the point where she came after one of his cars with a sledgehammer, and she said, no more supermarkets on the cars, no more supermarket logos, no more money from the markets, you're done. So that presented a problem for Crawford. And for the first time, it looked like he wasn't going to get a chance to compete in Indianapolis that year. That was until his friends, actually the McGuire brothers, with their car care products, stepped in and they said, Ray, we'll sponsor you for Indianapolis. It's at the time, McGuire's didn't have a professional, or they didn't have a commercial product. Actually, it was like a professional supplier. So they said, we're not really in it for the marketing. We're going to do this for you because you're a friend. And they wrote him a check for $10,000 for that year, which was astronomical, considering that most sponsorship deals at that time were like for $500 and maybe a hotel bill for the month. So Ray bought a new Curtis 500 G2, and we have an example of a Curtis 500 G2 in the center in the library today. He had a new chief mechanic also in Edgar Elder, who was an old friend of his from midget racing days. Edgar had suffered a severe head injury and was no longer able to drive, so he helped Ray out with his Indy cars. 1957 and 1958, he failed to qualify for the race. Again, they just couldn't figure out the new Curtis race car. But in 1958, he did meet Juan Manuel Fangio, who was at the track as a rookie. Took his rookie test, although he didn't actually stage a qualifying attempt. And they were on the track together, and Ray was unaware of the inexperience that Fangio had on the oval, so he wasn't really sure which direction he was going to go when he pulled off of the track, and Ray actually spun his car out trying to avoid Fangio. So he looped the car around, didn't hit anything, but he got out and he said, gosh, I'm probably the only guy to pass an F1 champ backwards. So the other interesting thing about it is that Crawford, from his time in Mexico, spoke Spanish fluently. He was also very aware of Fangio's influence based on his sports car outings and so forth. A lot of the Indianapolis guys didn't know who he was. They didn't know who Fangio was. So he kind of assisted Fangio while he was at the Speedway as something of an interpreter. And they actually bonded, he and Fangio, very much so. And that would come into play in 1957 and 1958 when Ray went to Monza for the races of two worlds, as they were called. The Monza 500 was an idea to pit the top 10 Indianapolis cars against the top drivers on the F1 circuit. And it was a great idea in theory, except that in 1957, when they were about to stage the first event, most of the European drivers boycotted based on safety issues. So Ray loved racing at Monza, though. It was a fast oval. It was rough. It was a tough race, and he loved it. He did very well. Also, he finished 7th overall in 1957, and then came back and finished 4th in 1958. And that's significant because 1958, you had names like Sterling Moss, Phil Hill, even AJ Foyt made an appearance, and Ray outplaced all of them. So quite a feat, again, considering that he was in his own equipment, and he just, there was something about the speed of that track that he just adapted to very well. And we've got a clip. I hope this one works because this is kind of cool. We've got a clip of Ray at Monza. Okay. Well, yeah. Anyway, Donald Davidson said that, winning the Mexican road race and finishing fourth at Monza in 1958 were probably the two highlights of Crawford's career. 1959, he came back to Indianapolis with a car that was constructed by Edgar Elder. They had really admired the work of A.J. Watson, the Watson Roadsters, and Edgar Elder actually went to Watson's shop to take notes as they planned to construct their own copy of Watson's car. And I talked to Watson about this before he passed away. He said that, yeah, Edgar Elder showed up to his shop. He said, I wasn't going to tell him no, but he said, I also wasn't going to help him out so much. But Edgar ended up taking a couple of notebooks full of sketches that they used to create their own roadster. It was different from Watson's designs in that the tailpipe actually went underneath the axle, and the fuel tank was configured differently. So from the rear, they're very, very different, although from the front, it looks like a Watson. Ray qualified 23rd again for the race that year and crashed out about halfway through the race. He was running 12th at the time, so fairly competitively, but he crashed and broke 4 ribs. He was bruised pretty badly and suffered a concussion. And I don't know if this one will work.
Ray Crawford into the wall. His fuel tank splits. For the 4th time in the afternoon, the caution signal slows traffic while firefighters douse the flame, and Crawford, not seriously injured, is helped from the cockpit.
So Ray, he was actually hurt pretty badly. He was in the hospital for about 6 weeks after that, but he always joked that the real injury that he suffered was a dislocated heart, because after that his heart just wasn't in the right place to race. So he did go back and try to attempt the Indy 500 a couple of times, but that was his last qualifying and his last successful qualifying effort. Ray had a lot going on outside of racing at the time also. Starting in 1957, he had kind of been formulating an idea to bring the Crawford supermarket brand to Mexico. And this was going to be a capitalization on his notoriety there after winning the Mexican road race in 1954. He had support from the Rockefeller family, a lot of outside investors, as well as a lot of his racing friends. He also had kind of developed a relationship with Miguel Alemán, who was the former president of Mexico. And Alemán was designing this new community called Ciudad Satélite, and it was going to be a modern community development outside of Mexico City, the perfect place for a new supermarket. So Ray designed this place that was going to be state-of-the-art. There was going to be a go-kart track outside of it. It was going to be unlike anything that had been seen in Mexico. And that was constructed during 1959 and 1960. April of 1960, the facility opened, and pretty early on, they ran into a lot of issues that were just a cultural thing between the United States and Mexico. They had never had a supermarket like that in Mexico before, so when they went to stock the shelves, the workers stocked one side, and they didn't balance it out, so all the shelves would fall over. There were a lot of challenges like this, and pretty soon it became a money-losing venture. It opened in April of 1960. By June, Crawford was bankrupt. And he went back to Alemán for financial support. Alemán asked him to put up his shares in the store for collateral, and basically, long story short, they took over the store from Crawford. So litigation for this venture dragged on into 1965. It ended up costing Crawford several $1 million, probably $5 to $6 million. So that had a huge impact on his ability to race during that time. He would skip the 1960 Indy 500. And when he came back in 1961, he had support from the McCullough Engine Company. They built go-karts and outboard engines, but again, they didn't qualify. This was another car designed by Edgar Elder, however, and it was significant in that it was the first car at the Speedway to have titanium suspension parts. And Ray made a couple of select qualifying attempts throughout 1961. He went to Phoenix late in the year, and we have this great footage taken by Dick Wallen that shows what happened during his qualifying attempt there.
An Indy Roadster is a rare sight on a dirt track, but Ray Crawford has entered his at Phoenix. Although the Speedway veteran gives it a valiant try, his qualification try ends in spectacular fashion.
So one of the interesting things that I came across though during this research project was I actually found the tail of that car down in Texas while I was doing some research, and lo and behold, the guy that owned it gave it to me. So now I've got that sitting in my garage, which is pretty cool. But you can see where in that last shot of the video, the dings and the dents and everything matched up exactly on that tail. So anyway, Ray he had a concussion, again, bruised ribs and stuff in that flip, but not badly hurt. That pretty much trashed the car though, and they had to work very hard to get it refurbished in time for the 1962 Indy 500. Bob Veith qualified the car. Ray couldn't get it up to speed, so he qualified 19th and then went out of the race on lap 12 with engine problems. So the last time a Crawford car appeared in the Indy 500, they actually finished last. And then Ray went back the following year for his final attempt at Indy, 1963. And turned the car over to Len Sutton after taking a few laps in it. And Len was bumped right at the last second during time trials, but that was actually the last time Crawford attempted to race competitively. So after racing, again, it's interesting because I think Crawford was so passionate about motorsports that when it was time to get out of racing, he had to do it with a clean break. He had to separate himself completely from racing because it was just too hard to keep himself out of the cockpit. So he wasn't seen at a professional racing event for a number of years. He went back to Indianapolis in 1968, but other than that, he pretty much disappeared from the scene. He tried his hand at a number of other business ventures. He actually owned a go-go club, of all things, in El Monte, California for a couple of years. And then there were so many fistfights and police visits with the go-go club, he turned it into a country western steakhouse. And that was a little more of a respectable crowd. So he did maintain a lot of friendships with racing personalities. On the left, we've got him at Sam and Alice Hanks' house in about 1974. The interesting thing, though, is that Ray he was very much a free spirit, and he still had that quest for freedom that he was pursuing. So in the early 70s, he and his wife Marion separated, and at that point, Crawford basically gave away a majority of his fortune, and he reduced all of his assets down, and he lived out of a Dodge RV camper for a couple of years, and he just kind of roamed around out west. His favorite place was the Palm Desert in California, and he was basically a nomad. So a very interesting time in his life. He was just doing his thing. Crawford would remarry in the early 80s to a lady named Gail, and they settled again in Covina, California, and probably not long after that, Ray started to show signs of Alzheimer's, which really slowed him down. By that time, also, Ray's mother had passed away, and with her passing, basically ended the Crawford supermarkets. She had done no estate planning, so when she passed away, in order to pay the capital gains taxes, the properties had to be sold. So the last Crawford store closed in about 1990, interestingly. Ray passed away in 1996 at the age of 80, and he was interred at Riverside National Cemetery, and there's his grave. Very nondescript for somebody that had lived such an interesting and diverse life. So one of the things that I thought about while I was working on the Ray Crawford project is why is this guy not more recognized? He was arguably one of the most influential drivers of his era. You look at his list of accomplishments, and it's pretty interesting. I don't know why that is, other than the fact that, again, Ray was a humble guy, and the way that he left auto racing kind of made his story a bit of a mystery to those that worked with him and knew him. But just again, to highlight some of his achievements, the in-car camera footage was a pioneering contribution that he made to auto racing. The titanium components in 1961 were unseen. The seat belts that he recommended in 1956 had impacts on safety that could have saved untold lives. He qualified for Indianapolis 3 times in an era when just making the show was a great achievement. And really, when you figure, there were very few people at that time that were racing in such a diverse span of series as Crawford was, with the midgets, hydroplanes, stock cars, champ cars, Indy cars. He was probably the most versatile driver, one of the most versatile drivers, if not the, of his career. And then he was influential in the careers of Mickey Thompson. Even Dan Gurney said that Ray was an inspiration to him as an independent driver. And Dick Wallen, Donald Davidson, and others have credited him. And then with the McGuire sponsorship, he was a pioneer of the large-scale corporate sponsorship model. And with his appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show and his talks in the Southern California area, he was easily one of the most visible ambassadors to racing in that era. So that pretty much wraps up the biography of Ray Crawford, just as an overview. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to continue the conversation. Yes, sir.
How old was he when he attempted to qualify that last time?
The last time, he was 47 years old. Yeah, so his first Indy appearance in 1955, he was at age 40 as a rookie. And then 1947, 1963, he was 47. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good, yeah. Thank you. Oh, no, my pleasure. Thank you.
And now it's time to go celebrate.
Yeah.
So please join us back over at the center where we'll have ice cream and cake celebrating not only Andy but also our own Kip Zeiger's birthdays today. So come on over, have some cake, have some ice cream. Andy, thank you.
Thank you.